The following is an AZPM original production.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, learn the story behind the first images captured by the Vera C. Rubin Observatory as it begins to peer into mysteries of space and time. UA professor Barbara Selznick's new book examines the American dream and how its representation on television has changed over the decades. And listen to some memories of what it was like to grow up around the Rillito River and Tanque Verde in the 1950s, when children may have been a little less supervised. Those stories are next on Arizona Spotlight. In 1951, the Howard Hawks film The Thing from Another World told the human race to keep watching the skies, but it was intended as a warning. Today, scientists are taking a closer look than ever at the universe around us, inspired by curiosity and the never-ending quest for knowledge. Tony Perkins has the story.
Ancient writings demonstrate man has contemplated the universe for centuries, but only recently did tools become available to accurately chart the starry skies from one horizon to the other. Scientists carried out a sky survey from atop Mount Palomar in Southern California in the 1950s. University of Arizona astronomer Roger Angell remembers researchers used a general-purpose telescope.
But it didn't have a great field of view, and it took a lot of time just to make one map.
Angell would go on to design some of the world's most advanced astronomical optics. But for years, he believed scientists and engineers could do more.
I could see how we could make a telescope a wide field, image the whole sky telescope, much bigger and more powerful.
The result is the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, backed by the University of Arizona and stationed atop a mountain in Chile. Victor Krabendam has served as manager for the observatory's mission since 2012. He recalls when the completed instrument sampled first light late last year.
Within 3 images, we were already taking data and taking images that were, to the human eye, spectacular.
Project planners revealed those first images on June 23rd.
This is the first image that we are unveiling to the whole world today.
Now, scientists around the world are getting down to the business of cataloging and interpreting the data streaming in from the instrument. But maybe the biggest aspect of the entire project is still to come. It's a 10-year survey of the sky above the southern hemisphere. Mission planners gave it the imposing title, the Legacy Survey of Space and Time. Buell Januzzi leads the U of A Department of Astronomy. He says the survey will generate hundreds of pictures every night, compiling a huge amount of data.
When you combine all of the data over the 10 years, you have a very, very deep map.
Januzzi notes scientists at the Rubin Observatory won't just be watching the stars. They'll be making a movie on one of the biggest stages imaginable.
There have been surveys that go this deep over very small parts of the sky. There have been some surveys that have done the whole sky, but not multiple times. So the analogy to a movie, I think, is a fair one.
Januzzi says every night will offer a snapshot of what the sky looks like.
You can see what moves, like asteroids. You can see what changed brightness, like variable stars, or stars exploding, becoming a supernova, or a star collapsing and disappearing, so it would actually go dark.
The ability to achieve such cinematics comes from the world's largest camera. It's the size of a small car, and engineers attached it to the Rubin telescope to come up with the wide field of view Roger Angell envisioned decades ago. Those who are familiar with time-lapse photography of the stars will notice the seemingly random streaks and patterns that flash by. Meteors, satellites, and asteroids all leave their mark, however briefly, across the heavens. Researchers using the Rubin Observatory will look deeper into space and further back in time than any previous sky survey. The streaks and patterns they'll see will also reveal the effects of dark matter, a kind of cosmic tug-of-war first studied by the observatory's namesake, Vera Rubin, in the 1970s. The fully functional telescope found 2,000 new asteroids in a matter of days. Scientists think the Rubin Observatory could discover 5 million more within a few years. The disclosure of so many never-before-seen objects could be the biggest plot twist from the greatest science movie ever made. For Arizona Spotlight, I'm Tony Perkins.
Perhaps now more than ever, the television industry is watching us just as much as we are watching it. Barbara Selznick, an associate professor in the University of Arizona School of Theater, Film, and Television, has written about how the current generation may actually have less of a connection to TV than any other generation since the medium began. Her book is TV's American Dream, U.S. Television After the Great Recession.
It's my favorite thing to teach, and it's because it changes every single time I have to teach something about television. It's so all over the place. Right now, and I hate saying enjoying because I'm not enjoying it, but what I find really interesting, is that the streaming platforms are not playing out the way everybody thought they would. Like even in the book, what people thought the streaming platforms were going to be in 2015, totally different from what they are now. There are so many more. They're struggling to make money. The companies, the conglomerates that own them, are getting rid of their cable networks because they recognize that those are not going to grow anymore. And the streaming platforms, the major ones, the subscription ones, Peacock, Paramount, Apple, Netflix, HBO Max again now, they don't really know how to make money.
Right. And the most amazing examples of that were 5 years ago during the beginning of the pandemic, where you would think that suddenly they were in an excellent position, but they all kind of floundered. They tried different things, different combinations of moves. And, look at the failure of a film like the Mulan adaptation to catch on, even though we're talking about a feature film there instead of a TV show. But
I think a lot of this was predictable, because they had this model that worked, that was broadcast television and cable, and there was advertising and there were weekly schedules, and it was all kind of working. They were making money. But then streaming comes along and they're like, okay, we're going to do all these other things. We're going to release shows all at once, and we're going to have subscription services, and we're going to do all of these things differently. But what you see now is them pulling back to all of the things that they did with cable and broadcast just over the internet. So advertising's back because people don't want to pay so much. It's so expensive. I can't believe how much I spend on streaming. Weekly releases are back. The whole idea that everything's going to be available all the time, that's gone too, because nobody can afford the license fees for all these shows. So we basically just have broadcast and cable television again, but over the internet. And they're bundling, right? The thing about cable that was annoying was that if you wanted to just have USA Network or just have Hallmark Channel, you had to get basic cable, and then you had all these other things you didn't watch. So that if you ever want to get rid of your HBO, but you have HBO bundled with Disney
and Hulu
and all, so now it becomes a mess again. Coupled with the fact that younger folk, a lot of Gen Z, they're not watching TV.
Right.
Not streaming services, not cable, not broadcast. I was talking to my son, who's 21 years old, right before I came here. And I said, well, so what are you watching? And he's like, well, you told me to watch Murderbot. So I watched that. He got that recommendation from me. It's like, but otherwise, I'm watching YouTube. So
yeah, I have a big YouTube addiction.
Yeah.
Those darn kids. We yelled at them for watching too much TV.
Yep.
Now
we need them back watching TV.
I saw an interview with Weird Al Yankovic recently, and the interviewer asked him, why is it that you're not really writing as many parodies as you used to, but you're kind of crafting your own original music? And he said, well, because I am of an age where I bemoan the loss of the monoculture. And back in the day, if I wrote a song like My Bologna, everybody knew My Sharona. I didn't have to explain it to them. But now younger people and people are listening to individual genres, and really microscopically focused playlists. And they aren't getting exposed to there are no more big national popular hits. Or very few, I should say.
Yeah.
I think you're referring back to that time when the monoculture was so present that people knew what was on TV. They knew what was on TV on a given night and whether or not they were going to make time to sit and watch that show.
Right. And I always think back to the last episode of MASH that had a huge, enormous audience. We don't get those numbers anymore. People are watching all over the map or not watching at all. They're on YouTube. Or they say, oh, I'll watch it later, and they never get to it. Or there are just so many choices now. And that's not a bad thing. I don't want to suggest that we should go back to having 3 networks.
Plus PBS.
Yes. But it's really hard to find an example of a TV show in my classes that my students have all seen. Friends.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, maybe Breaking Bad,
I was going to
but
suggest
not,
that. Yeah.
But not anymore.
Yeah.
It used to be The Sopranos. Barely any of them have seen it anymore.
So the place I really intended to begin this interview is actually probably one of the least interesting parts of it. But to define the title, we need to talk a little bit about the American Dream. And I think back to a piece I heard on NPR many years ago.
You listen to NPR?
From time to time. It was a piece from the BBC discussing what is this American dream that the Americans are always going on about. And so they asked a random selection of people. They did a vox pop, and they asked people, how can you define the American dream? And it turned out that no matter whether they were UK citizens or American citizens, it was equally difficult for them to define the American dream. So for the purposes of this book, what did you settle on as a definition?
An equally difficult. I mean, it's so complicated. So the American dream is this. It changes over time because what we think of the American dream as being changes as society changes. It's not one thing. There are elements of the American dream, and they become more or less important and more or less stressed at different points in time, depending on what's going on in society, what's going on with the economy, what's going on in culture. It's a messy concept. And that was something that I struggled with in the book was, and so I kind of stuck it all in the intro, which is what you do. And it's like, okay, these are some of the things, and here's some history about how it has changed over time. But there are certain elements that come up again and again. And it's things like freedom, individualism, meritocracy, and the ability to change and grow, the ability to move up in station or, to social mobility. There are certain things that come up, but something like material goods. Is the American dream having a house and 2 cars in the suburbs? Or is it having a career that you love and people around you who are meaningful? I mean, we really see those kinds of things change over time. What's more important? What's less important? The materialistic dream versus the moralistic dream, as it gets called in times.
Mary Tyler Moore comes to mind as a really accurate reflection of what the American dream for women was like in the 1970s. To work in a field that was male-dominated but still have a position of importance. Mary wasn't the receptionist.
Yep.
Sorry, Pam, but Mary was not. She was a producer.
Yep.
And she had the ear of her boss, and she had his confidence. So I think of that as being a great example. You make some terrific points about the show Friends and The Office. And I was much more swayed by the argument about The Office. I never really thought of The Office as presenting something. I thought of them as they're Dilberts, they're working for the man. And then to hear you point out things in the book about how The Office actually shows a very supportive and growth-oriented group of people.
Yeah, there are people who don't necessarily love their jobs or see their jobs as a calling. Not necessarily. They don't see their jobs as a calling, except maybe Dwight. Dwight sees his job as a calling. But they have found a community there that's more important than what they're actually doing. The character in Friends who's had a consistent job is Chandler. And nobody knows what Chandler does, and it's clear that his job is meaningless, and they make fun of it all the time. So if you just set a show in Chandler's office, I kind of feel like that would be The Office. What the show is depicting 2 people. The work doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your job is meaningful, if you're selling paper in this digital age. If you have a community of people who care about you there, stick with it. Stick with it, and that's good enough. So in terms of the American dream, if part of the American dream to people is having this career that is meaningful, that they love, that they feel passionate about, which I'm fortunate enough to have, that necessarily isn't so important if you get a steady paycheck and you're working with people who you enjoy for the most part. Good enough. And, telling that to people around the Great Recession.
Yeah, I was interested how the recession played such a large role in the book, that you pinpointed several things about America's connection to television and, once again, as reflected in the title, TV's view of the American dream, that all changed or kind of almost flipped on their head during the recession.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the recession started with the housing crisis, right? Just a complete failure of the financial industry to take care of and care for people in their homes. And what's a basic tenet of the American dream? Having your own home. What's a basic tenet of television? Sitcoms, people in their homes. So this idea of home really is central to so much in U.S. society, this idea that you have a place that is yours, a place that belongs to you. Even if you're renting, it's your space. It's a place where you can be yourself. It's a comfortable place. It's security. The home is it's supposed to be someplace safe. And that fell apart, literally fell apart with the recession. So it impacted the way people thought about their homes and about their dream. If their dream was to have this home and they got this home because they got a great mortgage, and now suddenly it's being taken away from them because they, things that were not necessarily their fault. I mean, in some cases, maybe, but in a lot of cases, people lost their homes because they signed bad mortgages, and they were encouraged to do so.
What's something about the way that millennials connected to television that changed during the recession that you think was important?
I think television became, it's always been this, but very much comfort food, in part because we had the rise of streaming happens at the same time, and you can see, that show that made you feel really, really good because there were no problems in your life. You can watch that over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's a wonderful quote in your book about nostalgia is memory with the pain removed.
Yeah, that's by David Lowenthal, who wrote an amazing book about nostalgia. Oh, his book is so good. You don't remember the bad part. And the funny thing to me about nostalgia is also that you don't necessarily want to see more of the text of the TV show. This is what cracked me up about Fuller House. I'm sure you were a big fan of Full House and Fuller House.
Absolutely not.
Full House, this cute family sitcom. People were rewatching it. It was on Nick at Night, and people loved it, and later generations knew it. And it's just this kind of sickly sweet sitcom. So Netflix sees that it's doing well. Well, we'll reboot it. We'll get us some Fuller House. And they make a sickly sweet sitcom. Well, people didn't want more Full House. They wanted to feel what they felt when they were 13 or 10 or however old you are when you were watching Full House. So giving them more of that, no one was really clamoring for that. They were clamoring for the feeling they had when they watched the original. And you can get that by watching reruns, but you don't get that by watching a rebooted version.
I think that
Remakes.
70s show ran into that really hard as well by attempting to bring it back. Characters forward in time.
Yeah. So my comfort show is Law & Order, and I will watch endless episodes of the original.
It's a different problem each week.
Each week, it's going to get resolved in some way. There are a few that don't, and I've seen most of them already. On the other hand, my daughter's comfort show, she's 23, Dance Moms.
Now, you mentioned that in the book about your students sometimes are at the age now where their comfort food translates to the peak of reality TV.
Uh-huh. Yeah, wow. I find that amazing. I don't enjoy reality TV. I see its value. I get it. I think some of the shows are actually quite interesting, but it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that shocks me is a lot of them, their comfort shows are also true crime. Mm. How that is comforting, I do not know. I mean, Law & Order at least is fiction. I know it's made up. They could access all these shows, right? They could sit and they could rewatch Gilmore Girls over and over and over again. Totally guilty of that. It was just lovely. Of course, that didn't mean I wanted more Gilmore Girls, but okay. So I think when you combine the recession with the availability of streaming, that move towards let's watch things that make us feel good. And also, one of the things I talk about in the book is things that reflect who we are. So you see a lot more diversity, some of it authentic, some of it, more, signifying. Yeah. You get more, small shows that are seem to really be trying to speak from the point of view of different groups of people.
The best television show that I personally have seen in 25 years was Reservation Dogs.
Oh, what a good show.
And that's not a show that you write about in the book.
No, it was almost in the book.
Oh, okay.
It was almost in there.
What might you have said about it?
I remember the first season really well because I've shown it in class. But what I find really amazing about that show is the push-pull of community and individualism. The characters making choices about what's good for them versus being part of their community and having to make those choices.
The choices that will make the other people around them happy.
Right. Or even trying to figure out if it makes them happy. Like, do I really want to go to California? Or am I happy being here with my parents? Mm-hmm. And having to justify that, because feeling like they're supposed to want something specific. They're supposed to want something. Like, the American dream should be this. We should want to get out of here. We should want to go to California, which has long been held up as the land of dreams.
And what happens? They go to California and they get robbed.
Right. And the idea of meritocracy versus grace, I think, is really important. What does it mean to be meritorious? And should you have to be meritorious to get health care? Or maybe you just get it because you're breathing? Just this idea of grace. There's this great article, and I can't remember the name of the author, but this article that talks about how shows helmed by female showrunners tend to focus more on this idea of grace, of community and forgiveness. So, moving away from the Breaking Bads and the Sopranos and and the Mad Men's to shows like My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It's a show that, there are people who are presented at first as not nice people, but the show explains that away and argues ultimately that everyone deserves forgiveness and grace, and it's okay. And, that's not true in real life. We know that's not true in real life. There are some people who are just bad, and they don't. But presenting this world where it's not like, oh, you better claw your way to the top and be the best meth maker there is. If, you can be okay. And there's this line from The Office that I think is so funny when, I can't remember the character's name, he gets fired and he's very upset and he won't talk to Michael. And finally Michael talks to him and Michael explains, well, I fired you because you were bad at your job. And he was like, oh, I thought you fired me because you didn't like me. I was terrible at my job. And he's totally cool with that. But everybody deserves kindness, and your value isn't your skill. Your value isn't who you are as a person. I saw that in Reservation Dogs, and that really speaks to me in television. That level of kindness.
TV's American Dream, U.S. Television After the Great Recession, is published by Bloomsbury. Barbara Selznick is an associate professor in the University of Arizona School of Theater, Film, and Television. One mission of Special Collections at the University of Arizona Libraries is to collect and preserve the stories of Tucsonans. Next, we'll hear remembrances about growing up in the 1950s, both in Tanque Verde and along the Rito River, when many children rode ponies and had much more time and space to explore the world around them. Our first story is from Cara Lee Addison.
I really wasn't from Tucson. I was from Tanque Verde. The washes ran. There was never bushes growing in the washes. No, because they ran so much. Memory is a tricky thing. And it seems to me I remember a lot more rain in the summer. Weeds coming up past my horses' bellies and, lots of weeds. And those orange and yellow caterpillars, lots of them. Well, we couldn't get to town when it rained. Nobody seemed to care. There was no bridge there. When it rained, everybody went to look at the washes. That was the thing to do. Let's go look and see how much the river's running. When I see pictures of the property that my father bought, then it was really sparse because of free grazing. It was free range, open range. There were cows everywhere. And if you see buzzards, you know that some cow had died. Yeah, and people shot. You'd hear bing, you'd hear the bullet go by. And you'd have to yell, I'm here, don't shoot. This is when I got a little older, but still, I don't know what the boys did. They just went out there and shot things. We had horses. Not until I was about 8 years old could I ride out of the property. But as I got older and older, I had to be home before dark. And we rode our horses backwards, and we galloped all over. And I did ditch school, though. I took my little toy horses in my comic books about horses, and I played in the desert and ditched school. And I would sneak out at night, too. I remember my Levi's would go whoosh down the hall, and I'd try so hard to be really quiet. And I'd go out and ride my horse with my friend. I went to Tanque Verde School. We had 1st through 8th grade, all going outside together. Yeah, because there were maybe 40 kids in the school. There was one teacher that was really nice. Most of the kids did not speak English when they came to school. Mrs. Neal, Marjorie Neal, and she smoked and smelled like smoke, but she was wonderful to the children. She really was, teaching them English. And we had a bell. You rang the bell like this. It was up in the belfry. Every morning we pledge allegiance to the flag, and there was no under God. Eisenhower did that. You know, it was this ritual. The older boys would put the flag up, and it could never touch the ground, or, terrible things would happen. And I also remember when it rained, we'd get to go home because they couldn't let us out to play. They probably couldn't stand us.
Next, Beth Castro shares some of the aspects that keep her 1950s childhood so vivid in her mind.
River Road in Dodge. I mean, that was the place to be. Right across from U of A Ag Center. Everybody had at least 10 acres or more of land. That was back in the day when we'd ride our ponies down the road bareback and barefoot. And all of our neighbors, we all had horses or ponies, and we used to ride our ponies down to a racetrack, for God's sake. You go across the river down there, and in fact, one time my sister and I, we were going down because I used to have gymkhanas every weekend, and actually got stuck in quicksand. I never thought there was such a thing in my life, and here's my poor little pony going down in the quicksand. I don't know how we ever got out of that, but those were days when you could stay out all day and not have to worry about somebody kidnapping you, and your little kids back then. We were right up against the foothills. There was really nobody behind us. In fact, right behind our house, there was a little old Mormon cemetery back in the day. And we used to ride through that. Not ride right through it, but ride by it. To talk about ghost stories and things like that. It was pretty funny. But then me and our other little friends, we'd play cowboys and Indians on our ponies. And, back in the day, they had all those little riverbeds. And they used to have those little tiny rubies in the sand. We used to collect those little rubies. I mean, those were fun days. I mean, that was fun when you can be doing stuff like that. The rest of the time, summertime, I mean, we were giving pony rides. We were going to pony shows or going to auctions, we were busy. We were always working. You get up in the morning, in like 5, 6 in the morning. You got to feed those animals. My father would go out there, and he loved cleaning that barn. It was pretty funny. So we had to irrigate fields, and we had those big irrigation pipes, and my sister and I, we were little, we were all out there. But we were all expected to, and everybody else on our whole road was out there working.
We just heard reminiscence from Carolee Addison and Beth Castro. They were recorded and produced by Angus Anderson for Archive Tucson, an oral history project of special collections at the University of Arizona Libraries. You can find more stories at archivetucson.com. And thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. Production assistance by Zoe Giuliano. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
AZPM podcasts are made possible in part by donations from listeners like you. Learn more at support.azpm.org. Thank you.